Hello, this is Zoni Mudd, and we are here to talk about race. First, we'll begin by playing a game. I've collected images off of Google for purposes of this game. I do not own the rights to any of these images, and they are only used for this educational game we're about to play. When I show a picture, you will name either to yourself or aloud to those watching with you the name of the race that is being displayed on the screen. For purposes of this game, in the case of fictional characters portrayed by actors, you will be stating not the race of the actor, but the race of the character that they are playing. For example, if I showed an image of the character, the mythological Norse god Odin, you might say Aesir. Now then, let us begin. Now for this last image, I do have to warn you, it is a very tricky one. So without further ado, here is the last image in this game. How well do you think you did? Now this is the portion of the game where I will redisplay the images I just shown you with the captions of the race that is being portrayed. How well did you do? Were the fantasy characters the only ones you got their race correct? Were you surprised by the correct answers? This is because we associate race as in people who are different from ourselves, and not necessarily creatures who are of a different species than us. Let's touch on the history of race, and this in turn will explain how the term race has come to use to differentiate people of different ethnicities. Unfortunately, this does detail the nasty history that some of us would like to quietly gloss over: racism. But race and racism are intertwined. Race and racism as we know it was born and raised in America. Indeed, prejudice and discrimination, as well as subjugation, genocide, annihilation of those who are different than yourself, existed long before that. Blacks, or if you prefer the term, those of individuals of African descent, again, it's all about your personal dictionary. We're not the only ones who have been enslaved. Native Americans had been forced into slavery in this country, but it was with little success. This was because, despite what anyone else may believe, this was their land. They lived here before the white settlers, so they knew the land better than we did. In fact, many Native Americans taught the settlers how to work the land, how to get plants and crops to grow. So it is hard to enslave a people who know their way around better than you. It was very easy for them to escape. It is not justification for what our country did, just one part of the grand picture. The earliest African slaves in this country, and don't be, deceived, the first Africans in this country were not slaves, but they were purchased from other Africans in exchange for guns. Guns were a European form of currency and were used as trades even with the Native Americans as well. However, Africa was not the only continent that practiced slavery prior to the colonization of the Americas. Europeans practiced slavery. Go back to the Roman Empire. The ancient Romans owned slaves. Greek slaves were said to be highly prized. Were these slaves treated better than that of the slaves in America? Perhaps, but keep in mind an ancient Roman patriarch could have his slaves put to death at his discretion. Also, he had that very same right with regards to his own offspring. That's his own flesh and blood. However, slavery in America reached all new heights of depravity. When Europe ended the practice, America clung on tightly to the teat of poor servitude. Slavery was justified, as many wicked wrongs were often justified. To paraphrase a history professor at the university I graduated from, it was justified as for the benefit of the slaves. There have been other justifications for the practice, such as those who considered it their biblical fate that Africans were made by God to serve them, claiming them as descendants of Cain, and that they were destined to be in servitude due to the sins of Cain. Race became a way to separate ourselves from those who looked different than ourselves. It became the justification for the ill treatment of others. Why should we treat them as we treat ourselves, since they are obviously different from us? It was these such thoughts that divided us into races, as to justify treating slaves and other people as animals, something with a human-like form, much like apes, but not human. A slave was not even considered a whole person, and for purposes of census, they counted as only three-fourths a person. Race also served to divide the lower classes and turn them against one another. Indentured servants initially were not much better than slaves themselves. They were indebted to their masters, but they at least had the promise of working off their debts and becoming free and independent. They had the hope of freedom. It was almost a guarantee, but they still had few rights and privileges until fear struck the hearts of the affluent, slaves and indentured servants shared many of the same grievances, and their populations greatly outnumbered those of the wealthy. So in order to divide and conquer them, they were pitted against one another, giving some rights and privileges to the indentured white servants, telling them that they were superior to the African slaves because of their race, because of the color of their skin. That was the beginning of racism, and white privilege. Control through manipulation. That is how it works. But knowledge is power. If we cast aside the idea of separate races, throw away the misnomer labels such as white and black, we will be taking one step closer to eradicating racism. It won't end it. Everyone has to accept that we are all human beings. Everyone needs to educate themselves and open their eyes and minds to the truth. I highly recommend reading Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Daniel Tatum, Ph.D. I consider this book to be the Bible of race. Now, please feel free to talk about race and racism openly and honestly. This is the only way we can accomplish true equality. Glossing over it, avoiding the conversation because it makes some of us uncomfortable, or avoiding the conversation out of fear that we will be judged for our thoughts or opinions by others, that those in power will suppress what we have to say, will accomplish nothing, but will perpetuate this system. Use whatever hashtag you feel is appropriate based on the contents of your conversation, if you are on Instagram or Twitter. But if you like, you can use My Race is Human to emphasize that we're members of the same race, the human race, but just talk about it. Have a discussion. Talk about your experiences. Have you experienced racial discrimination? Have you experienced it secondhand from someone you know? Did your parents experience it? Just talk about it. Even if you've never experienced it, never witnessed it, or you don't know anybody personally, talk about it. Let your thoughts be heard, but also keep your ears open. Listen to what others have to say. Absorb it into you. Again, thank you for listening, and please, if you do comment on this video, on top of avoiding profanity, I cannot stress this enough, do not use racial epithets. If you do not know if something is a racial epithet, then simply do not use it at all. This is Zony Mudd, and again, thank you for watching.